going mobile. You'll still be with us.
Okay.
Okay. And Anita and Fred are on Zoom as well. So
Ashley was on a minute ago, but she logged off.
Okay. Ashley actually has our presentation, so did we lose her?
Yeah, she was on like maybe right at 2:15 and then she just logged off.
Okay.
we can take a quick break if we want to wait for her to get on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just trying to, I think they're trying to coordinate with their CEO and their president who wanted to say hi. All right. Oh, I see you. I see Ashley. So Ashley, what we'll do is when they resume, I was going to just kind of give some background on our project and then you can share the screen. I think you have the slide deck for the final report. Okay, good. Very well. All right, so we'll just take it from there and they should be back in session in about 5 minutes or so.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Do we have Chris or Chad?
Yeah, so Chad is was expected to be here, but I think we got our time zones mixed up because Arizona is actually on mountain time as well. And so Arizona doesn't change. So when people say mountain, we get a little confused. So I know I think he's running a little behind and going to try to make it today.
Okay, are you going to be at Res 21 next week?
Yeah, so I will be there. I'm on 2 panels on Monday and on Tuesday. The first panel is idea to launch, so talking to tribes about setting up environments for startups so that, it can support their economic development. And then I'll be talking about strategic planning.
Okay, great. All
And
right.
Allie is here too.
Okay, good.
Yes. So unfortunately, I just spoke to Chris and Chad, and they're both in meetings at this time, so they won't be able to give a brief introduction. So we're going to go ahead and have Ashley just lead with the project information. And I'm so sorry about that. We were just, it was a time zone miscommunication, and my profuse apologies about that.
Oh, no worries. I believe our chairwoman, Madam Chair, is going to be at the conference next week, so she'll be able, well, she knows Chad already, but she can meet Chris as well. Yeah. This will be
Yeah,
fun.
wonderful. Yeah, I look forward to the meeting. That'll be great.
Okay, it looks like we can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Kisukiyakit, Ituumnasukin. Good afternoon, Tribal Council, Madam Chair. Today we want to present our final report on the heat mapping project that we worked on for the past year. You so graciously offered to allow us to bring in some consulting services last September. And the people who came forward were just super prime people, the best of the best. I had Ashley Hemmers and Raina Thane from Thane Strategies. And Raina was with me all the way until last month, and she joined Secretary Holland's team. So she's working out of DC now. But they brought their expertise as part of the National Center for the American Indian Enterprise Development Group. And throughout the past year, they were like my sounding board. Whatever issues we were grappling with or whatever we wanted to do a little more in-depth research, I got to meet with them and discuss things with them on a monthly basis. And they would enlighten me, they would provide research, they knew how to access federal legislation. They actually watched our state legislature and everything that was ensuing in the past year, anything that could help tribal development. They were on the front lines. And so I want to thank this council for allowing me the opportunity to work with such experts and just gracious people, because as you all know, the pandemic, there were no playbooks, but at the same time, we wanted to figure out the best way to assist in the recovery and also resiliency for our people to help our businesses. So I appreciate all of your foresight and support for allowing us to work with this group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Hemmers, who was one of our main consultants, and she's going to review our final report where we did about 5 case studies on opportunities that would be very good for our tribes should we decide to pursue any of them. So with that, Ashley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Velda. I really appreciate the time. Thank you, tribal leadership. I really appreciate your time today. And it's been such a privilege working with your economic development leaders and idealizing the different types of data that's out there to support some of your economic pursuits. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll talk a little bit about the scope of the project and then go into the framework. Now, with the tables that we're presenting, this has all been put together in a formal report that was submitted. If you would like copies of that report, Ali, who is on the call now, can submit that to your representative body so that you can have copies as well, as long with our task sheet that outlines every deliverable that we achieved over the past partnership. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Is that viewable?
Yes.
Okay,
In
great.
living color.
So in terms of our project scope, the National Center set out to work in conjunction with one of their financial partners to provide technical assistance to tribes throughout the country. Your tribe was selected in partnership, and Velda worked very diligently with the National Center to set up the memorandum of agreement so that we could make sure that all of the intellectual property is protected for your economic development managers. But the goal of the project was really to assess any type of best practices in your region for economic development strategies. At the beginning of this project, it was really to kind of help access information related to COVID policy, pandemic best practices for economic development leaders who were looking to optimize any type of federal or state programs. We did this work working with each tribe. There were 3 tribes selected: your tribe, San Carlos Apache, and the Colville tribes. And we looked at how to expand thoughts on economic development goals, economic outlooks, and the approach. And then we examined infrastructure and capacity, so both internal capacity and any type of structural systems that were in place that could be optimized for economic endeavors. And then finally, we took all that information, we looked at certain industry indicators that were selected by your team, and we mapped out potential opportunities in those respective industry selections. And so we'll walk through some of that information now. For our framework, for the last 6 months, we've really been working on mitigating data so that we can assess all of the information. And so beginning in January, we started to work on the interested industry areas after a series of one-to-ones, really trying to kind of strategically identify the interests of your economic development department. And then took a deeper dive into facilities management, which was something that they were working on at the time. Provided more capacity work on property acquisition and different operational timetables, what that looks like in the field. And then finally, one of the things that was a constant theme throughout this project was tourism. So we knew all along that we wanted to do a deeper look at tourism for your region. Finally, in our next month, we took advantage of finding those themes, and then we did a material collection in 4 areas. The first area that we looked at was geothermal projects, what geothermal projects look like in Indian country, who was doing them, how were they doing them, how did they build the infrastructure to build such projects. The second area was bison ranging, specifically because there are a couple of other tribes, one specifically that we worked with that own and operate a bison range. So what were their best practices? How could we make connections with them to your office? We also looked at C-stores in the convenience market, and then finally cannabis. From that research, we went to the ideation phase and we started inputting all of the data. We did an assessment of the industry to identify key indicators within the industry, what those challenges were, what their limitations were, and trying to build out a full picture of what this would look like in action, in practice, and what resources would be needed so that if there was a decision that there wanted to be movement for economic projects in this area, how that would be received, how it would be mapped out, and then also how resilient those industries are so that you have a better frame for investment. And then finally, we provided heat mapping for all of the selected industries and put together a draft report. So that is pretty much our framework. I'm going to go ahead and go through a little bit of the data. I know that this is a lot of material in a short period of time. So does anyone have any questions for right now? No? Okay, well, I'm just going to keep moving so that we can make sure that we stay on schedule. In terms of the report sections, there are 4 sections to the report that was provided to our partner, our tribal partner. The first one goes through exactly what we talked about right now is our framework. How did we find the data? How did we utilize the data? And how did we compile? The 4th indicator in that overview discusses a little bit about what heat mapping is. Heat mapping was very important to the National Center's partner because that industry utilizes heat mapping to create strategic decision-making matrices so that they can identify if the investment opportunity is investable. So we wanted to provide heat maps to our tribal partners so that if for whatever reason you guys wanted to migrate or move into these economic areas, then when you're having conversations with financial or potential financial partners, you have the heat maps available so that you can show the types of resiliency that these industries hold for your region. Secondly, we looked at the economic landscape. We really took a deeper dive into economic development in federal investment areas. We, through one-to-one strategy sessions, which were pretty much monthly and about 90 minutes at a time, we went through all of the policies for the month that could be opportunities. We talked about application and how they can be applied. And then we also provided examples of how they were being applied in Indian country throughout our network. We also took a look at your state and local outlook. So we looked at any type of city economic development report that was available. We looked at Montana economic development reports and regional reports that were available. And then your manager provided key information for indicators and projections that they have been taking into consideration so that we could look at that as a whole. And we settled on 4 industries: tourism, bison ranging, cannabis, and C-stores. And we came out with about 6 case studies to give a fuller representation of what those industries look like for other tribes, what some of those limitations were, and then also what some of those opportunities were, particularly with cannabis, because we know that this is kind of an emerging market and a lot of tribes are thinking about what that would mean for what state or federal legalization would mean for their areas. Personally, I come from the Fort Mojave Indian tribe. Our reservation spans 3 states. In 2 states, it was legal. In 1 state, it was illegal. So it was very confusing for us for a very long time. So we tried to provide 2 outlooks to your economic development team so that they can really think about it from a metropolitan standpoint in terms of city center hubbing, dispensary, large distribution, and then finally from a rural standpoint of what that looks like in kind of rural areas, how that can be operationalized and what types of benefits and challenges that appear in those types of environments. And then finally, we reviewed a benchmarking study for convenience stores so that your economic development team had a better indication of the convenience market, especially after the pandemic and especially with the increase in growth in local tourism to your areas. And then finally, in our last meeting, in our last one-to-one strategy session, we took a look at different types of financial frameworks and modeling systems to support economic and social policy alignment, because one of the key pieces of information that we discussed during our strategic sessions was the importance of providing for economic opportunities so that it can have social impacts within your region and area. And so for us, when we look at report outcomes, we had a schedule of one-to-one strategy sessions. We also reviewed state and federal economic development reports, regional economic data, and then we had a huge reliance on partner experience and site-specific knowledge. So when we looked at state and local outlooks, what we found was that in the state of Montana, over the last 5 fiscal cycles, there has been a steady growth in consumer spend. And so we wanted to really identify if that growth in consumer spend was continuous or if it would have been severely affected by the pandemic. And what we found in the data is that while consumer spend was affected, that your region, particularly near your traditional homelands, for the economic reporting that was completed, there was an increase in local driving traffic. And so that means that while the rest of the country was affected in large ways, for economic indicators for your region near your reservation, the largest piece of economic impact that is specific to the pandemic really hit over that second quarter in 2020. And so when we think about economic development overall, there is a expansive opportunity for growth in the markets that we took a look at, specifically for how Montana is trending in terms of recovery and resilience. So that was really quite the story to take a look at during our time with your team on site there. One of the other questions that the team was working on was what we need to do something with the international market. We need to do something with tourism. We know that folks are coming from international markets. And what we found was that for your optimization, your consumer spend actually came from out-of-state residents, but out-of-state residents close to your regionality. And then also close to your consumer type in terms of the consumer that's active within your market. And so we were able to identify the top 9 states. There's 8 here, but there's 9 in total of where your consumers or where your market are, so that when you think about target marketing, you can think about some of the strategies and best practices that those states are deploying, that those regions are deploying. When you're thinking about strategic marketing, you're thinking about strategic share. If anyone will be going or attending the Reservation Economic Summit or the National Indian Gaming Association conference in the coming week, then really understanding that your partners could be in these tribal optimization areas and how to share or grow those emerging markets and what that would look like in terms of economic development across state and across tribe. And so we really wanted to spend some time on tribal optimization and provide some best practices on how that can be accomplished. In terms of tourism, the heat maps that we put together talked a little bit about the industry corridor, the industry overall for your state, and then also the resiliency factor. And what we found in looking at state economic data and then also GIS data is that when we cross-located consumer travel by hotel spend, by credit card spend for areas close to your reservation is already on hubs 2, 4, and 5 for the whole state of Montana. And so one of the strategy sessions that we looked at was in terms of optimization, if you guys are looking at marketing towards tourism, really thinking about how to be strategic in those marketing decisions, because in accordance with the co-located data, folks are already coming to your reservation, they're coming to your area, they're coming to your region. And so it's less of a question of how do we get people here and more of a question of what do we do when they get here, and are they spending their dollars with us? If not, how can we get them to, and how can we get them to in a way that provides consistency throughout the market hubs that we seem to be located around. So these are the types of pieces of information that we explored in those strategy sessions to build capacity. And we were so excited that how well received it was, so that your economic team felt a little more prepared in terms of the type of marketing accessibility units that they should look at, so that they can be as strategic as possible when making recommendation to their leadership body. We also did a heat mapping for the cannabis market. Before we started looking into cannabis, your economic team had provided us information that the state had legalized cannabis, and they were in the process of setting up state guidelines so that there could be some operationalization around what that market would look like for your state. And so what we did was we provided a series of strategy sessions that went over best practices for what this looked like for other tribes who had gone through that process. We also provided some indication of what these memorandum of agreements and memorandum of understandings look like at the state level. And then we also provided information on the types of best practices that need to be looked at in terms of if there was to be a move into the cannabis market, how to be strategic in approaching financial systems and what types of financial systems actually are approved, accredited, and can work within these markets, because most financial systems, depending on their structure and depending on their investment type, have to have specific requirements so that they can provide lines of credit in this type of industry. And so that was very important to this discussion as well. We also looked at some of the major data points from the largest think tanks on cannabis distribution in the nation to provide a better overview for the economic team of what this would look like in terms of preparing and getting ready for what this industry would look like in your region. I know for my region, I just shared, one of my states is California. We have a little itty bitty town in the middle of the desert. There's about 3,000 people and there are 20 distribution licenses. So as soon as the state provides guidelines, we always like to have some information to tribes on what this would look like, because depending on how those licenses are going to be distributed in your area, they're going to pick up speed at a pretty accelerated rate. And that's always something that we like to look for and help tribes with in terms of understanding how to position themselves so that they can, one, be prepared based on what they feel is necessary for their membership, and then also be prepared in terms of how to engage with this market if they so choose. Let's see. In terms of consumerism for this market, we took a deeper look because we understand that for every tribes, it's a tribally specific decision. Some tribes are more open to this industry, some tribes aren't. And this was really a fact find for this project to kind of provide a better contextual understanding of what this looks like, rather than provide any indication of whether this is a market that folks need to look after, pay attention to. Our approach is really just to provide the information so that leadership has the best tools at their desks to make these decisions on behalf of their people. In terms of consumerism for the population, what we found for cannabis is that when looking at regions that legalize cannabis by states, not only did they have a high percentage of folks who were interested in consumption, but as the states continued to grow with their legalization, so from year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3, there were more and more opt-ins as consumers started to get comfortable with the industry being open and available to them. So one of the things that we thought was really interesting so that we could provide to your economic team in thinking about what this industry might look like is one of the statements that often arises is that, okay, anyone who's interested in cannabis are automatically going to be consumers. They're going to participate in these markets. They're maybe already participating in these types of markets. But what we're finding is that, yes, that will happen initially, but the longer the market is available in terms of legalization, in terms of length of time that this market is open to your area, there is continual drive for opt-in for consumers to opt into participation. So there's an even stronger growth rate for people who, you're going to have those folks that are maybe not interested right now, but as soon as they start seeing year one come by, year two come by, year three come by, they're going to start participating, or at least what the data is suggesting is there's going to be a 8 to 10% increase year over year of opt-in consumerism of folks who didn't opt in initially, and that growth is steady over time. So even in a mature market, you're still going to have new growth for this market and new participation in this market. The last area that we looked at was convenience, particularly convenience stores. We provided some best practices and also some points of connection for your economic team to develop relationships with tribes that have had a longer convenience market trajectory. And so when we looked at overall cash sales for your state, what we found was that for your state, tourism obviously accounts for a 31%. What we know now is that that's generated by local regional traffic instead of kind of the larger international markets. When we looked at international marketability, it was still very small in comparison to that regional optimization that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And then finally, retail and gas is a huge industry. And when we look at the industry indicators for that, we also discussed in our strategy sessions how to think about supply chains so that you can capture that as economic hubs for your regions, how to then coordinate those ventures so that they're in alignment with those tourism hubs that were identified at the beginning of this presentation, and then how to measure their effect and impact on each other by building systems that coordinate that projection. And so that was one of the other areas that we looked at during our time together over this project. And then finally, one of the areas that we ended with was thinking about economic intervention as a mitigation tool, and really thinking about what types of strategies or development opportunities that we have as economic operationalists to put together models that more readily fit into the social impacts that we're trying to achieve for our nations. And so we provided a couple of models, particularly from the Midwest, that looked at developing a system of economic development and how that translated into positive results for their regions in terms of, the reduction in employee loss, and then also a reduction in employee burnout, which was something that we had discussed. And then finally, really the introduction of the multiple state modalities that allow for an intersectional reach for economic development managers to plan alongside. So how do workforce models develop into these types of things? What are the appropriate models to develop workforce so that you can prepare and ready a workforce for the industries that have been selected? And then what type of investment would that mean for industry overall? And so I realize that I've kind of gone through a lot of this research that we've done over the last year in a pretty quick time frame, but I wanted to leave enough time for any of the questions that you may have. I know that you have a pretty full agenda of other items, and so we wanted to be brief with the data, but just know that the National Center here is ready to support your economic team, and we've really appreciated the opportunity to provide our resources and to share resources so that it could help build capacity and also help provide the data around the different types of industries that were indicated as important for your nation. And then finally, we will be at RES. If anyone will be participating next week, we will have a couple of panels on what this type of data can do in terms of developing industry startup, developing economic hubs around tourism, and then also what that would look like in terms of refreshing and pivoting, so that you can prepare for a really successful fiscal year. So does anyone have any questions for me?
Ashley, I was hoping you would expound a little bit on the Wunu Lounge and the Las Vegas Paiute. Let us know what the outlook has been and how they've recovered. And then also the Ely Shoshone, has everything come back to normal with their drive-through sales and all the retail? Can you give us a little update on those?
Yeah, so we the two case studies that we looked at for cannabis were the New Woo Cannabis Dispensary. New Woo Cannabis is open for the public. In terms of amenities, their cannabis marketplace still provides 24/7 market service. The lounging area is still in closure due to gathering, but I believe they will be opening next month, reopening next month. A lot of the different restaurants and dispensaries that have the lounges are allowing small gatherings back into their facilities. So what we are projecting for that market in Las Vegas is to see more tourism growth at the end of this fiscal year. So during this last fourth quarter, there's really going to be a large capture. One of the indicators that they're looking at now is in terms of tourism trends. So there are a couple big things that are happening this month for the first time in Nevada when we look at metropolitan data for this market. And that is the relaunching of concerts and arena tours. And so, for example, there are 3 big headlining arena tours scheduled for this market for July. The last one taking place last weekend at Arena Stadium, and that was at Allegiant Stadium, I'm sorry, and that was Garth Brooks, and it was sold out. So there were over every seat in that arena was sold out. We're really excited to get those economic reports by July 30. So I have no problem sending you over what that depiction looked like for those markets, so that you can take a look at that rebound. But what we're seeing is that in the metropolitan area of Nevada, while the consumer has changed, the spend hasn't. And the consumer that is starting to revisit has a higher capacity for risk. So that means that you're looking at a lot of Western regional consumers that are more open to gambling, consumption, and also different types of consumption. So whether that be cannabis or alcohol. So our beverage sales are pretty much through the roof going into this fourth quarter. In terms of New Woo, or in terms of the dispensary in the Shoshone region for Shoshone Band, that model is in a convenience store. And so during the pandemic, they had consistent sales because their model is presented for convenience. So it really didn't affect their market type. One of the things that they had struggled with was supply and demand and limited offerings. But now that more dispensaries are opening up, especially in the Southern Nevada area, they should be able to kind of re-add different amenities to their menu. Before the pandemic, they had a 3-page menu of types of cannabis. And now I believe they're going to be re-entering into the edible portion as well. So they're going to be revisiting edibles and what that would look like for their markets. So 2 different types of models, financial models, the rural model and the metropolitan. I believe New Woo is going to see, a lot more sales as Vegas continues to open up. But for that rural market type, based on those convenient models, they weren't really as subjected to what Nuwu had faced because their model is based on convenience. And so what was really hurting them during the pandemic was their availability for supply.
Does anyone have any more questions for her or our report?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Anita.
I'd just like to make a comment, and you're talking about tourism, and I'm glad that you brought that up. One of the things that we seen over the first part of July was just an influx of people. I mean, with the lake up there at the north end of our reservation, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I mean, you couldn't get on Highway 93. They were bumper to bumper. And my husband made the remark about how many people were floating through here, either to the lake or up to the park or wherever their destinations were, but and how much of the economics that we were losing, to other businesses. And we'd talked about tourism, and you hate to see it happen because what it can do to the area, but it's there regardless of what we want. And between the stores and the gas stations and the convenience stores and the propane cells or whatever for their homes, and you go to Walmart, half of the shelves are empty, because they get so much for the local people. And then when you get all of these people on top of them, the parking lots are just full. So I'm glad that you brought up the tourism. I enjoyed the presentation. It was very informational. I look forward to more. But thank you.
No,
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you for that, Anita.
Anyone
I really
else?
appreciate it.
I wanted to point out that the case studies we did for the geothermal waters were for very low impact and minimal investment. So that's why we actually, Raina did a lot of that research for us out of Hot Springs, Arkansas, and in Alaska, because we know there's so much opportunity there, but we're not sure how we're going to go about that yet because we don't really have any capital. And so just, we looked at some of the bare minimal on how they were able to not only develop, but to do renewable energy projects as part of their development. And they were able to sustain and maintain and grow their tourism industry as well. So those case studies are also in this report. Is there anything else you might want to add, Ashley?
No, just thank you for your time. And to Anita's comments, I really appreciate your comments about really seeing that acceleration and growth. Just know that your manager Velda really spent a few months looking at that, and we answered those questions that, hey, we know that people are coming in. This is no new thing for Indian country, right? We have some of the most pristine waters and we want to protect them. So let's be strategic about finding out where they're going, maybe capturing some dollars to bring back to our economies in the meantime, since they're already there. And then when we're strategic about those things, how to make sure that we keep preservation and protection at the forefront so that we can make sure that that as economic operationalists, we're supporting kind of overarching goals for our communities as well. So thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed this project and really had a very fantastic time learning about all of the important work that your economic team is doing.
Thank you. Allie, do you have anything to say?
I do. I also just want to thank you for working with us on this project. I know I learned a lot while doing this with Ashley. Ashley did so much work into this as well, and I hope that this will be helpful to you going forward and that you'll be able to make some great headway using this information. I'm really excited to see what you guys have in store for your future.
Thank you. This comes at a really good time because we're just setting our priorities right now. And I'm not even sure if tourism was on the list. Because, and I've been thinking about that during this whole presentation. We just approved resolutions today about business development and land acquisition and protection, employment, all of that. So this comes at a really good time to just put it all together. So thank you. Thank you for the report.
Well, thank you all, and we know where to reach you, and some of our staff will be joining you next week, and good luck with the conference. I'll be joining remotely.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye.
now. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we do. Can you send me their contact info and I'll try to connect with them at Res? I did see their panels. I went through the agenda last night, so yeah. In,
Madam Chair, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Just sitting here thinking about the hot springs projects that we've been discussing for years and years and years, and look, here we are today. Haven't gotten anywhere. Haven't done anything, and I was just wondering, we're going to be receiving our annual allocation of the water settlement. Now, I'm not sure, just my thoughts, but I don't think we wouldn't be able to spend that amount every year, so I would like to have our legal department put a strategy together to see how we can divert some of those funds so we are able to utilize to start working on hot springs projects, to get our bathwater going, because we're just missing too much opportunity here. And just recently Mike informed us that we had one of the landowners in there start drilling in town there, which was affecting the adjacent aquifers. And so when that's just a start, we're getting more and more people moving in, and there's going to be more greedier developers that are going to start doing things like that. So I would really like to see this council proactive in start development of our own bathhouse. If we can do that as soon as possible, and have our legal department see if we're able to start utilizing those funds, because like I said, we're not going to be able to spend 90 million a year. But
Yeah,
just
I
my
think
thoughts.
the only way our hands are tied is because that development was going to come out of the settlement dollars, which we can't spend until we receive all of them. But the way we could go about it now is if we developed a resolution similar to what we did the last couple planning sessions and let them figure it out and come back to us with options. So I think that's one that is just ripe for development, and we've never dedicated the resources to do it. Pardon? Our priorities? Did we plan another session on planning? I
No,
don't
but
think
we probably should just on this specific topic.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
Just-
Anita.
just kind of a follow-up, and Lynn hit on it, and that was kind of what I was leading up to, is that individuals are going to be moving in here and they're going to be developing. And, you know, like you said with the bathhouse, we've already had an individual go over there and drill a well and do whatever, but you know, the entertainment build, you know, like kind of like that kettle house, they were talking about the industry starting back up in Vegas. You know, there's stuff that I think that the tribe could do that isn't as expensive as we think it would be, and with the investment would come back to the tribe and the people. And if we don't do it, those other individuals are beating us to it. You know, so I really hope that we can look at this and kind of challenge ourselves. And this is a good opportunity to look outside the box and, like you said, kind of a wish list, and start tapping into them resources, because they're coming through here and they're not going to stop. It's getting worse every year. And, you know, that's even a tribal grocery store, you know, convenience stores, you know, gas stations, you know, the bathhouse itself, some of the other economic development we talked about across the bridge, you know, with the KO campgrounds and stuff. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed listening to that Lance Morgan yesterday about their vertical integration. You know, they just have it all. They don't even have to go outside for anything. So I thought that was something that we could work towards. Like you said, it took them, you know, years to do it, but I think we have a good start on our planning, you know, just the process we've been through the last couple weeks.
I was amazed at, you know, like we've got the land. That's the one thing that a lot of the tribes don't have, and we've got the land to develop. So I was really impressed with that workshop.
Mhm. Okay, with that, I think Fred's up. This is your cue, Fred.
I having a hard time working my thing. Working this. Okay. Well, there it is. Motion to adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.